Iron Maiden is one of the biggest bands in the history of music. So far, they've put out 16 studio albums, but which one is best? Find out next on Music is Your Friend. Cue the theme music. Maiden! First, a little intro. Iron Maiden, for all of you that don't know, is immense. They have millions upon millions of loyal fans, and that makes them really huge. With over 35 years of little to no formal airplay, they have grown to be the biggest, well, actually the second biggest heavy metal band ever to walk the earth. Actually, the numbers don't stop there because they're actually one of the biggest names in the music business in general. So they are one of the biggest bands ever. They have also toured relentlessly for the last 40 years and played well over 2,000 shows. Sometimes during the course of a year they would actually play over 100 shows per year, which is... that's just totally crazy. I mean, for everyone who doesn't know what touring is all about, you owe it to yourself to watch their Iron Maiden Behind the Beast documentary. That movie kind of comprises every single element of touring, and it's an amazing documentary. But anyway, Iron Maiden sold over 100 million albums. 100 million. They didn't sell all these albums for nothing. They managed to become that big by having consistent, amazing songwriting. And coupled all of that by playing catchy parts, you know, really inspired parts on their instruments. And, you know, that made for great songs. They're not like really virtuosos on their instruments, but they're really good players, and they almost always play to the song, not against the song. There was no showing off, and you know, the public really appreciates that. And when you take that kind of an approach to songwriting, when you merge all of that with some good vocals, charismatic vocals, or in Bruce's case, excellent vocals, then that complete package gets elevated to a whole nother level. Bruce, their vocalist, is just an amazing singer and has a 4-octave range, which actually isn't that important, but what's really important is what you can do with those 4 octaves, and Bruce can do a lot. He always used his vocal capabilities to give that theater-like sense of drama to the lyrics, which is what actually any decent singer should do. When Bruce is not flying airplanes and being creative otherwise, you know, writing books and, you know, hosting radio shows, or radiating his throat cancer, that's right, his throat cancer, a singer, he is hitting all the high notes live, and he is a, you know, pretty decent bloke. The guy is just crazy. So a quick fact before I go on. With all things metal, there's always sort of a rite of passage. With such a devoted fan base, you actually can't say stuff about Maiden and, you know, not be well informed. Maiden is multi-generational, so there are fans that only, you know, like the first 2 albums and that's it for them. Many older fans actually lost touch with the band and they just prefer the older stuff while they don't know the new stuff. Many younger fans prefer the newer albums and they don't like the old stuff as much because they have to discover all of that stuff, while this new stuff is current and they can really get into it and they can, you know, have all of the t-shirts and everything. In order to do this list justice, you actually need to know the complete Iron Maiden catalog. And I consider myself more than knowledgeable to speak about Iron Maiden and actually to do this list justice. And in this video I'm gonna try to focus on song quality, not age or lineup changes or other irrelevant stuff. The only thing that matters are the songs. That's it, so let's begin. Book of Souls. This is the worst Iron Maiden album of all time, so far. I'm sorry if you're a younger fan and you really dig this album and this is, you know, the album that got you into Maiden, but, you know, it is what it is. And it's not because it's the newest album, it's not like I need a listen-in period. I've listened to the album multiple times and it just doesn't cut it. The Book of Souls album just won't grow on me because the songs are too long for what they are worth. I repeat, it's not that they are too long. I love long songs. The problem is that the content of these new songs is just lacking to their old longer songs. Another major problem is that Bruce is singing outside of his comfort zone, and his vocal melodies do not sound inspired like some of their previous efforts. This is also, as far as I know, the only Iron Maiden album that has songs that weren't written by members of Iron Maiden. To be fair, if anybody outside of Maiden should write Maiden material, it should be Roy Z. If you're not familiar with Roy Z, he's an amazing guitar player and actually an even better producer. Roy Z is actually responsible for many good things in metal, but he is especially responsible for Bruce Dickinson's solo career, and which is amazing. So if anyone should get a fraction of Maiden money, it should be Roy. If there was any justice in this world, there should be a truck parked right outside of Roy Z's house right now with a couple of guys just unloading sacks of cash to his front door. Roy Z is that good. Anyway, back to the album. These songs are just lacking in firepower. There are parts within these songs that are arranged in non-cohesive manner, which is really strange for Maiden. The themes and the solos lack identity, which is actually a fact that I didn't catch on any of the overly positive reviews. They were all like, "This is the best album ever!" All of the reviews that I've seen or read were actually under the influence of the magnitude of this whole project. I mean, to have 92 minutes of music is huge in any genre, but that magnitude actually doesn't translate to good songs. That magnitude doesn't translate to this is a masterpiece, That magnitude doesn't translate to excellence. If you need proof, look no further than the 18-minute mastodon of a song called Empire of the Clouds. The song itself was inspired by a blimp or a zeppelin or an airship, R101 as they call it, that actually crashed on its maiden voyage. And similar to Empire of the Clouds, that also was ironically a failed experiment that should have been tested out first. The album feels rushed and incomplete at times. The songs from this album just can't compete with their best songs, and therefore the album deserves to be in the last place. Also, please notice that I said their best songs, not their old hits. The simple fact is that I can't imagine myself listening to any of the songs from this album rather than, say, Ghost of the Navigator or Flight of Icarus. Number 15, Killers. What? But that's my favorite album, and that's perfectly fine. Just because it's one of the worst albums doesn't mean that it can't be your favorite. Oftentimes, Americans tend to gravitate towards the older albums, to the classic albums. They love their original lineups, but actually, it doesn't mean that those lineups are capable of producing the best albums, On top of that, the first US tour actually happened supporting this album, so that actually made even a bigger impact because, that's the album that introduced a lot of people to Maiden. Sadly, it's not the best album ever, but it was produced by Martin Birch, who is one of the best producers of all time. Killers sound like much better than Maiden's debut album. Having Adrian Smith take over the guitar duties, that's also a plus. But someone's pluses are other people's minuses, so I actually don't like Paul Di'Anno's vocals. I like his vocal qualities, but I don't like his monotonous melodies. His melodies weren't that inventive, and they didn't fuse well with lyrics. Some of his vocal lines are just way too blunt, and some of them just blindly follow guitar melodies. Some of the songs also lack identity. You can take parts from some of these songs, cut them up, paste them. You can mix the parts around on the computer and actually put them in different songs, and you wouldn't notice any, significant change. Now, credit where credit is due, some of these parts are just excellent. But that being said, I also have to point out that these excellent parts are sometimes glued together with parts that have very low artistic or any other value. And that brings us to number 14, which is The X Factor. The first 3 songs on this album are excellent, the first 2 being Sign of the Cross and Lord of the Flies. Blaze wrote the song Man on the Edge, and that song can stand alongside some of Maiden's finest work. I like it better when Bruce sings it though. Some of the songs on X Factor are too long, they sound too much alike, and they have these boring and unnecessary parts. I also mind that there is no vibrato on the high notes, and actually all of the notes kind of flatline, like they died from cardiac arrest or something. Although, to be fair, that's not Blaze's fault. These songs would sound much better if Steve Harris just tuned down his bass guitar for a step or two, so the songs would be easier to sing. If that was the case, then Blaze could have added some of his characteristic vocal elements, which sound amazing and they're good in Maiden. And actually Blaze Bayley does all of that stuff live with his other, musician friends and with his other bands. But that just didn't happen in Maiden because somebody was kind of big-headed. Steve Harris. So yeah, this album sits at number 14, and I have to add that Blaze Bayley is amazing live, and he's a really good showman and he's a really good frontman, and I encourage you to see him. Also check out his solo stuff and start with the song Kill and Destroy. Number 13, No Prayer for the Dying. People actually don't like this album, but the points slowly add up and in the end it's actually more than decent. Mother Russia is by far the best song on the album. I like parts of the Tail Gunner, don't care much for Holy Smoke. I don't like Bruce's raspy vocal style which he used on this album for some additional drama. That kind of singing, compared to regular belting, just stands no chance. In general, the songs actually sound complete, but some of the parts are quite boring and feel very uninspired. If you made a short medley from the best parts of this album, it would be a really good medley. But then again, you can make a medley from some of the parts of this album and it would be one of the worst medleys ever. Therefore, unfortunately, this album just lacks that magic that their best albums have in spades. Number 12, it's the Iron Maiden. This is Iron Maiden's first album. This album has the old hits, has this undisputed attitude, and actually quite decent songwriting. However, when you take, the complete Iron Maiden catalog, this album is just a fraction of what Maiden is capable of producing. Like with other Diano stuff, the vocal melodies just lack ideas. And I have to say that, that punk approach can be appealing to some people and, especially teenagers, but I feel that Maiden is a fruit that needs to be served ripe in order to really enjoy it. Number 11. The Final Frontier. The Final Frontier. To a certain extent, this album actually has the same problems as the Book of Souls album. The only difference is actually that this album isn't as long. The most positive thing about this album is the song Coming Home. This one rightfully deserves its place with some of the best songs in the Maiden catalog. If you ask me, Maiden fans should be equally intimately familiar with this song as much as they are with, say, The Vicar Man. There are some other decent tracks on this album that are worth noticing, such as the title track The Final Frontier and the song Where the Wild Wind Blows. In my opinion, Adrian Smith was man of the match on this album. The Talisman is a song that's actually gonna pass under the radar. Sadly, it's gonna pass under the radar. The song actually doesn't have a chorus, which I think is amazing. I'm just sad that it won't have the same impact as it should have had. There are parts within that song that are just too high for Bruce to sing properly. Bruce was just torturing his vocal cords in order to hit those high notes, and if this song was tuned down for even a half a step, he would get these notes with a lot more girth, and I think that's the proper way to sing this song. If the vocals on this song had a little bit more girth and they were a little bit more down to earth, I think that, a lot more people would actually stand behind this song and could relate to it. To all of the youngsters that just recently joined the Iron Maiden party, I just have to say that I'm not bashing on your favorite albums or, the albums that got you into Maiden. I'm really not trying to destroy the albums from your era. It's just that they aren't as good. But I have to point out that Coming Home is one of their best songs. Number 10 is Virtually 11. Virtual 11. Compared to the albums that I have so far featured in this list, this album is a huge step forward. This album just screams quality. This album features some serious songwriting with songs like When Two Worlds Collide, The Clansman, and Future Real. These songs are brilliant examples of how the Iron Maiden machine can work even when you don't have Bruce Dickinson at the helm. And now for the big one. This album features the song Como Esta Amigo, which is one of their best songs ever, and it was never performed live. Never. I'm waiting for a version with Bruce behind the mic, preferably from a live show somewhere in Argentina. Till then, please check out the live version with Blaze Bayley behind the vocals and Thomas Wiesen, the Dutch guitar player, on the classical guitar, because I think that's a really good rendition of the song. Fear of the Dark. The title track has a life of its own, but the album actually features some more tracks that are really good, like Judas Be My Guide, Childhood's End, Wasting Love, and Afraid to Shoot Strangers. And while there are more songs on this album that people should know of, these songs alone actually make it one of the best albums in existence. Before I continue with this list, I really have to point out that every single one of these albums has its qualities, and links to buying all of these albums are down below. And before I go to the final 8, I beg of you to please subscribe to my channel, and actually Eddie commands it. Number 8, Peace of Mind. There's just no arguing that Trooper is a seminal piece. When you couple that with songs like Flight of Icarus, Revelations, and Where Eagles Dare, you will get a kick in the teeth that you won't forget for a long time. Number 7, The Number of the Beast. You have Clive Burr and Bruce Dickinson on the same album. Amazing. I'll just name a few songs. Hallowed Be Thy Name, Children of the Damned, Run to the Hills, The Number of the Beast. And did I mention Hallowed Be Thy Name? Now, over the years I have seen many similar lists that actually place this album at number 1, and I fully agree that it's an iconic album, but I just think that it doesn't deserve to be at number 1. Maiden can do better. In my opinion, songs like Gangland, Invaders, and actually to a certain extent 22 Acacia Avenue are actually dragging this album behind. And actually, if I had to choose the ultimate Iron Maiden playlist, the song The Number of the Beast actually wouldn't be anywhere close to the top. Number 6, Dance of Death. The way that I figure, Maiden has these like 2 trilogies that happen in clusters. This album is part of one of those mega trilogies. Now it's the right time to repeat some of the stuff that I said in the beginning of this list. Many older Maiden fans actually lost touch with the band. At least they kind of lost touch with the newer material. Some Iron Maiden fans actually stopped listening to Iron Maiden when Bruce joined the band. Some people were outraged when Nico became the new drummer for Iron Maiden. Some people liked Maiden all the way till Blaze took over the vocal duties. Some people actually liked Blaze better than Bruce. A lot of people actually kind of lost touch with them at that time. Some of the older fans actually only followed them till Brave New World, and then they lost touch. Those people that stayed with Maiden through thick and thin actually were able to witness this album as a masterpiece that it is. To be fair, the album had a really unappealing album cover, but if you look past the imagery, like everyone should always do with Maiden, then you kind of encountered this fascinating array of songs. Rainmaker, Passchendaele, Dance of Death, and Journeyman are definitely the key points of this album. But the rest of the album has this really undeniable energy and really good songwriting, with really not much negative to say about this album, except maybe for the album opener. This album sits proudly at number 6, A Matter of Life and Death. Everything that I've said about the features of Dance of Death stands for this album as well. The reincarnation of Benjamin Brigg is probably the most interesting song on the album. I can't remember Maiden ever being so heavy. Almost all of the vocal tracks were recorded live with the band, and I think they're just amazing. But even though Bruce sang his heart out on this album, I think that Nico McBrain is the man of the match on this album. His drum parts really fused well with the songs, and he delivered a really good wallop. Now, except for Benjamin Brigg, other songs from this album that are really worth noticing are These Colors Don't Run, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, and Lord of Light. Same as with Dance of Death, this album also features some of these songs that are just incredible but kind of less obvious. But of course they're less obvious when you place them amongst the hard hitters, In comparison to Dance of Death, on top of all these songs and a much better album opener, this album deserves to sit at number 5. Brave New World. Contrary to popular belief, many of these songs from the album were actually already written while Blaze was still in the band. So for all of you people that are, willing to say that Blaze sucks, remember that fact the next time you listen to some of the amazing songs from Brave New World. This is an excellent album, but it's safe to say that my reasoning concerning some of the songs on this album might not be the same as yours. For example, the song Blood Brothers is a fan favorite. I love that song as well, but if I had to pick my top 5 from this album, I really have to say that Blood Brothers wouldn't make it on that list. That list would comprise of songs like The Wicker Man, Ghost of the Navigator, The Nomad, Out of the Silent Planet, and of course Brave New World. But when you couple those songs with Blood Brothers, with Dream of Mirrors, with The Mercenary, with The Fallen Angel, and with The Thin Line Between Love and Hate, you really can't find a single bad song on this album. Finally, as the best album of the second trilogy, this album proudly sits at number 4. Number 3. The strongest song on this album is The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. At 13 minutes and 45 seconds, it's the longest track on the album. But unlike other Maiden songs that top the 10-minute mark, like the ones on the Book of Souls album, this song has plenty to offer, and I can't say that it's boring at all. The title track is also a powerhouse, and when you add tracks like Aces High and 2 Minutes to Midnight, you get a killer album. The songs Back in the Village and Flesh Off the Blade are actually keeping this album from shooting straight to number 1. So on this list, it sits at number 3. Seventh son of a seventh son. These 43 minutes of absolute bliss are just the pinnacle of discography in general. Not just Maiden discography, but all discography. And I'm not even joking. I mean, the album format, the long play format, was introduced in 1948. Ronnie James Dio was 6 at the time, and Robert Plant, the singer of Led Zeppelin, was born on that same year. Dio died like 8 years ago, and Robert Plant is still with us. So discography actually isn't that old. If you ask me, it makes perfect sense that like 40 years after the format was developed, for an album to be described as amazing and to be described as the pinnacle of discography. I think it makes more sense that albums that were made in the 80s are actually better than the ones that were made in the 60s. But that's a whole different topic that I might cover in a different video. Anyway, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son has no bad songs on it. It's one of those all killers, no fillers albums. This concept album features iconic drums, guitars, bass, vocals, and a very wise usage of synthesizers combined with solid-state guitar amps that gave it its special sound, and it proudly sits at number 2. And now for the big one, for the king, for the master, for the undefeated champion, proudly at number 1, Somewhere in Time. This album is at the top of my list with good reason. The album was produced by Martin Birch, and I feel that it's most complete out of all Maiden albums. I really can't find a single bad song on this album. The only reason why this album is number 1 and not Seventh Son of a Seventh Son is because I would never trade any of the songs from this album for Can I Play With Madness. I really have to point out that the synergy between the drums and the bass guitar is probably the most prominent on this album out of all albums from the Iron Maiden catalog. The drums and the bass were recorded at one studio, and you can really tell because they are rock solid. The rest was recorded in a different studio where they were free to experiment, as the futuristic concept actually allowed for these outlandish things. Now for the controversial part of this record. Keyboards. First of all, I don't know about you, but I would never make a futuristic album without using some sort of synthesis. This album has a fair amount of synthesis, with guitar synth parts that are layered underneath the guitar parts, and half of the time you actually don't know what you're hearing. But most importantly, it sounds good. The keyboards also provide a sense of depth, and if you combine that with distorted guitars that also give that sense of depth, that just works. Deal with it. Most of the so-called controversy actually comes from people that act as parrots. People that just keep saying, keyboards suck, without really thinking about it. You can find over 1,000 different sounds on an old, used, but still really good $200 keyboard. But even if you, for some stupid reason, hate one particular sound, you can't hate 1,000 different sounds. It just doesn't make any sense. Furthermore, to prove my point, I'm just gonna name some of the artists that use keyboards or that use samples or any other instruments that you can play on a $200 used keyboard. And they did so in order for their songs to sound better, not worse, better. Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, The Beatles, The Rolling Stones, Dio, Ozzy, The Who, Aerosmith, Kansas, The Scorpions, Van Halen, Pink Floyd, Rush, Yngwie Malmsteen, Deep Purple, Rainbow, Slipknot, Gary Moore, Rammstein, Dream Theater, Queen, The Cult, The Doobie Brothers, CCR, The Eagles, Guns N' Roses, Def Leppard, Foreigner, King Crimson, Motorhead, Journey, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and Metallica. So if you still want to complain about keyboards, call up every single one of these bands and tell them their music sucks because they use keyboards. Now that that's out of the way, let's go back to my number one pick, and that's Somewhere in Time. Wasted Years, Alexander the Great, Deja Vu, Heaven Can Wait, Sea of Madness, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, this amazing opener called Caught Somewhere in Time, and Stranger in a Strange Land. When you combine all of these songs and put that amazing cover on top of it, that's just the best Iron Maiden album of all time. And that's about it. So, you know, listen to Iron Maiden and up the irons, as they say. Which band discography should I cover in my next video? What's your list and how do you explain your top 3 albums? What's the reasoning behind all of that? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, but before you do that, I beg of you, just please click the subscribe button. It really means a lot to me and it's gonna keep this channel going. Do it now, it's really important. The custom background music for this video is called My Fair Maiden, and you can find more details about it in the description below. That's about it, and me and Albert are out of here. Adios, Maiden fans.